I didn't find out my property had been hijacked for a 200-person wedding through a phone call, a polite letter, or even a tearful family announcement. I found out on a Tuesday morning, staring at a highly filtered Instagram reel on my phone while drinking my morning coffee. There was my cousin Chloe, twirling in a sickeningly sweet cottagecore dress, throwing organic rose petals over the custom stone patio I had spent 3 years building with my own bleeding hands. The caption read, Venue SECURED. Can't wait to marry my soulmate at our exclusive private woodland estate. Hash Chloe ties the knot aesthetic wedding hash cottagecore bride. She had geotagged my exact address, my private sanctuary. The 2-acre slice of suburban paradise I had bought as a foreclosure and painstakingly transformed into a lush sanctuary of weeping willows, a massive koi pond and manicured gardens. Not only had she claimed it as her own personal exclusive estate, but her comment section was already flooded with hundreds of replies praising her incredible property. She hadn't asked, she hadn't hinted. She had just marched onto my land while I was at work, shot a high-production video with a drone, and broadcast to 15,000 strangers that my home was now her personal wedding venue. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it paralyzed me, leaving a cold, hard knot of absolute fury settling heavily into the pit of my stomach. I sat there at my kitchen island, the coffee turning bitter and cold on my tongue, watching the 15-second video loop over and over again. With every repetition of the sickly sweet acoustic cover song she had used as the audio track, my disbelief curdled into something much darker. I tapped on the comments. OMG the willow trees. Did you buy this place just for the wedding? One follower asked. Chloe's reply basically, we wanted something that felt completely ours, a true private oasis. That stone patio is gorgeous. Who is your landscaper? Asked another. Chloe's reply, it's a family secret. We love keeping things authentic and handmade for the aesthetic. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the phone. That family secret was me. I was the landscaper. 3 years ago, I bought this house at a bank auction. To call it a fixer-upper would have been an insult to dilapidated shacks everywhere. It was a rotting, mid-century disaster sitting on 2 acres of overgrown, invasive weeds, dead trees, and a mosquito-infested swamp of a backyard. I bought it because the land was cheap, the bones of the house were solid, and because my demanding, high-stress career required a sanctuary. I'm an intensely private person. I don't post my life on social media. I don't host massive, roaring parties. I wanted a quiet, green space where I could hear the wind in the leaves and nothing else. For 36 months, I bled for this property. I spent every weekend, every holiday, and every ounce of my disposable income tearing out thorny brush by hand. I rented an excavator to dig out the swamp, lining it, installing industrial pumps, and transforming it into a pristine, 80-foot koi pond bordered by imported river rock. I planted 3 weeping willows as saplings and nurtured them into sweeping, majestic giants. The stone patio Chloe was currently prancing on in her video. I laid those stones myself. I hauled 2 tons of Pennsylvania bluestone in the back of a rented pickup truck during the hottest July on record, leveling the sand, tamping it down, and sealing the joints until my hands were covered in calluses that split open and bled. I strung the heavy-duty warm amber Edison lights that crisscrossed the yard, giving the entire space a magical twilight glow. This house was my fortress. It was the only place in the world where I didn't have to manage anyone else's expectations. And Chloe had just planted her flag in it. To understand the sheer, catastrophic entitlement required to trespass onto someone else's property and declare it your wedding venue to the internet, you have to understand my cousin Chloe, and by extension, the toxic, suffocating gravity well that is her mother, my Aunt Karen. Chloe is 24 years old, though she operates with the emotional permanence of a toddler who has never once been told the word no. She is a lifestyle influencer. In the grand ecosystem of the internet, she is a remarkably small fish, boasting around 15,000 followers, most of whom I suspect are bots or people who enjoy hate-watching her content. But in Chloe's mind, she is a Kardashian. She speaks in Instagram therapy buzzwords, constantly talking about her boundaries, her peace, and her curated energy, all of which are convenient shields to protect her from accountability. Her entire life is filtered through a sepia-toned, beige-heavy aesthetic. If it doesn't look good on a grid, it doesn't exist. She doesn't have a real job. She relies on the bank of mom, occasional ad revenue from pushing terrible, chalky protein powders, and whatever she can grift from local businesses by promising them exposure. Aunt Karen is the architect of this monster. Karen is my father's sister, a woman whose entire personality is built around competitive martyrdom and aggressive enabling. From the moment Chloe was born, Karen decided her daughter was a prodigy destined for greatness. The entire extended family was expected to fall in line, orbiting Chloe like planets around a beige, insufferable sun. If Chloe wanted something, the family provided it, because to deny Chloe was to stifle her light or cause generational trauma. When we were kids, if I got a new toy, Chloe would want it. Instead of teaching her daughter not to take things that didn't belong to her, Karen would corner me, her voice dripping with that sickly sweet weaponized guilt. You're older, you're so much more mature. Chloe is just a sensitive soul, she feels things so deeply. Be a good cousin and let her have it, family shares. I learned early on that in this family, you were either the golden child or you were the help. I chose to be the ghost. As soon as I was old enough, I moved away, got a degree, built my career, and kept my interactions with my extended family to polite nods at Thanksgiving. I paid my own way. I never asked for a dime. I bought my ruined house and I stayed out of the drama. But my quiet success had always bothered Karen. She viewed my financial independence in my beautiful home not as the result of 80-hour work weeks and blistered hands, but as a hoarding of resources that rightfully belonged to the family. Specifically to Chloe. 6 months ago, Chloe got engaged to a guy named Braden. Braden is essentially a piece of human cardboard, a thoroughly bland, agreeable guy with a mediocre job who wears whatever neutral tones Chloe lays out for him on the bed. When the engagement happened, the family group chat exploded. For weeks, it was nothing but diamond ring close-ups, venue mood boards, and Chloe complaining about the toxic, price-gouging wedding industry. It turned out that renting an exclusive woodland estate for a weekend cost upwards of $20,000. Chloe didn't have $20,000. Aunt Karen didn't have $20,000. And to Chloe's absolute horror, actual luxury venues did not care about her 15,000 followers and refused to let her pay in exposure. I had muted the group chat. I assumed they would figure it out. They would find a nice public park or a local VFW hall and drape it in enough beige chiffon to make it look acceptable for the camera. I never, in my wildest nightmares, imagined she would look at my home, the home I bled for, and simply decide it was hers. I watched the Instagram reel one more time. The drone shot zoomed out, showing the entire span of my backyard, my privacy fence, my locking iron gate. She must have come over yesterday while I was at the office. She must have figured out the keypad code to the side gate, likely watching me punch it in during the one and only family barbecue I had foolishly hosted a year ago. I didn't text her, I didn't call Aunt Karen to complain. I knew exactly how that would go. Karen would gaslight me, tell me I was overreacting, and twist it into me being unsupportive. No, this required a face-to-face confrontation. I put my coffee mug in the sink, grabbed my car keys, and drove the 20 minutes across town to Aunt Karen's house, where Chloe still lived in her childhood bedroom. When I pulled up to the curb, I could see them through the large front window. They were huddled over the dining room table, surrounded by fabric swatches, bridal magazines, and a massive corkboard vision board. They looked like two generals plotting a deeply unimaginative pastel-colored war. I didn't knock. The front door was unlocked, as it always was, so I pushed it open and stepped into the foyer. Oh, the rustic twine is definitely better than the silk ribbon, Chloe was saying, holding up a mason jar to the light. Silk is too, try hard, we want it to look effortless. Like we just threw it together in the garden. You have such an eye, sweetie, Aunt Karen cooed, sipping from a mug. It's going to be the event of the decade, everyone is going to be so jealous. Excuse me, I said, my voice flat, cutting through the suffocating scent of Karen's vanilla lavender plug-in air fresheners. They both jumped, Chloe spun around, nearly dropping the mason jar while Karen clutched a hand to her chest. Jesus, Karen snapped, her eyes narrowing as she saw me. Don't you knock. You scared the life out of us. The door was open, I said, stepping fully into the dining room. I didn't take off my shoes. I just stared at Chloe, who was suddenly looking a little too closely at a beige fabric swatch. Chloe. Care to explain the video? Chloe blinked, her face a mask of practiced, wide-eyed innocence. It was the same look she used when she was 8 and had broken my favorite model airplane. Video. What video? I pulled out my phone, opened Instagram, turned the volume all the way up and hit play. The saccharine acoustic music filled the room. Venue secured, Karen smiled, a tight, triumphant stretching of her lips. Oh, that. Yes, isn't it wonderful? The footage came out so beautifully. That drone guy really knew what he was doing. You brought a drone operator to my house while I wasn't there, I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. The cold knot in my stomach was beginning to catch fire. Well, we had to see how it looked from the air, Chloe said defensively, crossing her arms. For the layout, I need to know where the natural light hits for the golden hour portraits. And honestly, the lighting over the koi pond is perfect around 6 p.m. Chloe, I said, enunciating every syllable, You cannot have your wedding at my house." The room went dead silent. The innocent mask slipped off Chloe's face, replaced instantly by a petulant, ugly scowl. She looked at her mother, passing the baton. Karen sighed loudly, the kind of deeply put-upon sigh of a woman dealing with a particularly slow, unreasonable child. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," Karen said, waving her hand dismissively. "It's just a yard. You sit in that big house all by yourself. You don't even use the space. When was the last time you even had anyone over? A year ago." "It's a waste." "It's my yard," I replied, my voice hard. "I pay the mortgage, I pay the property taxes, I built it. It is not a public park, and it is absolutely not a free venue for you to play pretend influencer in." Chloe gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. "Pretend influencer? I have a highly engaged audience. This wedding is going to be a major content milestone for my brand. Do you know how many brands are watching me right now? This is my career." "Your career is begging for free lip gloss on the internet," I shot back, the filter snapping off completely. "And your brand is apparently trespassing and breaking and entering." "I didn't break in," Chloe shrieked, her face flushing a blotchy, uneven red. "I used the gate code, you gave it to us. I typed it in a year ago so you could get a folding chair from the shed. I didn't give you a permanent, unlimited pass to my property," I said. "Take the video down, now. Post an update saying the venue fell through. I don't care what excuse you use, but you are not getting married in my backyard." Karen stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. She crossed her arms, inflating her chest, assuming her ultimate matriarchal form. "Listen to me," she said, using the low, threatening tone she usually reserved for retail workers who refused to accept expired coupons. "Chloe has had a very stressful time planning this. Venues are ridiculously expensive and the industry is predatory. We are family, family helps family. You have this massive, beautiful space that just sits there doing nothing while my daughter is crying herself to sleep because she can't afford her dream day." "That sounds like a budget problem, not a me problem," I said smoothly. "It is a family problem," Karen barked. "We are using the yard, it's already decided. The save the dates went out digitally this morning. 200 people are coming and half of them have already booked their flights." My brain short-circuited. 200 people, 200, I echoed, the sheer logistical nightmare of that number temporarily overriding my anger. "Are you insane? I live in a quiet residential cul-de-sac. 200 people is a commercial event. There is no parking, there is no infrastructure. My septic system is meant for a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, not a music festival." "You don't talk about toilets, it ruins the vibe," Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes. "And people can just park on the street, it's not a big deal. People do backyard weddings all the time." "People do 30-person backyard weddings," I corrected her, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. 200 people requires permits. It requires off-site parking shuttles. It requires portable restrooms, which, by the way, I will not let you put on my new driveway because they'll leak chemicals. "We aren't getting porta-potties," Chloe practically screamed, looking genuinely horrified. "Are you crazy? Do you know how ugly those are? They would completely ruin the photos. People can just use the bathrooms inside the house." 200 people cannot use my 2 residential bathrooms," I yelled, finally losing my temper. "The septic tank will back up into the bathtubs. You will destroy my plumbing." "You're just making up excuses because you're a jealous, selfish hater," Chloe yelled back, tears springing to her eyes. It was a practiced, weaponized crying. "You've always been jealous of me. Just because you're alone and miserable doesn't mean you get to ruin the most important day of my life. I'm the bride, this is my day. You don't get to say no." "Watch me," I said, taking a step back toward the door. "I'm changing the gate code today. If you or your drone guy show up on my property again, I'm calling the police for trespassing. If anyone shows up on the date of your wedding, they will be turned away at a locked iron gate. Figure something else out." I turned on my heel and walked toward the front door. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm of adrenaline and disbelief. I had done it. I had set the boundary. I expected them to scream after me, to hurl insults, maybe even throw one of those stupid rustic mason jars. Instead, Karen's voice floated through the hallway, eerily calm, dripping with a poisonous saccharine sweetness. "If you do that," Karen said slowly, "I will call your grandmother, and your Uncle Dave, and Aunt Susan. I will tell the entire family that you maliciously waited until the save-the-dates went out to pull the rug out from under your cousin. I will tell them you promised her the venue, and then backed out just to be cruel. You know how your grandmother's heart condition is. You want to cause a family rift that will literally kill her." I froze, my hand on the doorknob. That was the nuclear option. My grandmother was the only person in the extended family I actually cared about. She was 90 years old, frail, and blissfully unaware of the depths of Karen's manipulation. Karen knew I loved her, and she knew I wouldn't do anything to cause a massive, stressful family blow-up that would inevitably land at my grandmother's feet. Karen had used this tactic before, weaponizing the elderly to get her way, holding family harmony hostage. I turned back around slowly. Karen was leaning against the doorframe of the dining room, a smug, victorious smile plastered on her face. Chloe was wiping away her fake tears, already looking back down at her fabric swatches. They had me boxed in, they knew it. If I fought them, I would be painted as the villain who ruined a young bride's dream and stressed the matriarch to death. The flying monkeys would descend. My phone would ring day and night with guilt trips from aunts and uncles who only knew Karen's twisted version of the truth. Fine, I breathed out, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Chloe squealed, clapping her hands together. Oh my God, thank you, I knew you'd come around, it's going to be so perfect. Fine, I repeated, my mind racing, trying to calculate the damage control. But there are rules. You are paying for a professional cleanup crew. You are renting luxury restroom trailers, not the plastic boxes, the actual trailers, and they go on the street, not my driveway. And you are dealing with the city for the noise ordinance because my neighbors will absolutely call the cops on a DJ at midnight. Chloe's smile faltered, her brow furrowing in irritation. Wait, what, a DJ? No, 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 we aren't having a DJ. We're having a live acoustic band for the ceremony, and then we're just running a Spotify playlist through some Bluetooth speakers for the reception. We wanted to feel intimate. I stared at her, intimate with 200 people. Yes, exactly, Chloe said, missing the sarcasm entirely. And about the cleanup crew, yeah, we can't afford that. We blew most of the budget on my dress, the photographer, and the custom canvas reception tent. So we're doing a DIY approach to keep it authentic. A custom canvas tent, I repeated, feeling a dull ache throbbing behind my eyes. And who exactly is doing this DIY cleanup? Karen stepped forward, beaming, reaching out to pat my arm. I flinched away, but she didn't seem to notice. That's the best part, Karen announced, as if she were delivering wonderful news. We wanted to keep the catering and the staffing within the family to make it more meaningful. Plus, professional caterers are a total ripoff, and they refuse to work without their own terrible, ugly warming trays. A pit opened in my stomach, a dark, terrifying abyss of realization. Karen. What are you saying? We aren't hiring a catering staff, Chloe chirped, walking over and shoving her massive corkboard vision board into my face. It was covered in pictures of tiny, intricate hors d'oeuvres, massive charcuterie grazing tables, and complicated signature cocktails. We're going to have grazing stations, very boho, very casual. Who is making the food? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Well, Mom is buying the ingredients in bulk from Costco, Chloe explained breezily. And since the wedding is at your house and you have that massive, gorgeous double oven kitchen, we figured you could just handle the prep. You're so good at making appetizers anyway, remember that dip you made for Thanksgiving 3 years ago? It was super cute. I stared at her, I looked at Karen, they were entirely, genuinely serious. You want me, I said, spacing the words out to make sure I wasn't having a stroke, to surrender my property to you for free. For 200 people, and while you are getting married on the patio I built. You want me inside my own house, cooking and serving food for your guests. Family helps family, Karen beamed. And don't worry, you won't be totally alone. I'll have Aunt Susan help you carry the trays out during the cocktail hour. You just have to make sure the hot food stays hot, the ice buckets are refilled, and then, just tidy up the plates when people are done eating so it doesn't look messy in the background of the photos. You want me to be your busboy, I stated. I want you to be a supportive cousin, Chloe whined, her tone instantly shifting back to defensive victimhood. Why do you have to make everything sound so negative? It's a few hours of helping out. Honestly, you should be flattered I trust you with the food aesthetic. If you don't want to help, just say you hate me and we can cancel the whole thing and I'll tell Grandma why I'm crying. I looked at the vision board. I looked at the photos of the delicate, labor-intensive canapes. I thought about 200 strangers trampling my manicured lawn, dropping greasy napkins on my Pennsylvania bluestone, and wandering through my private home looking for a toilet while I stood over a hot stove, serving them like the hired help. I looked at Chloe, standing there in her beige sweater, her chin jutted out, perfectly confident that she had trapped me in an inescapable cage of family obligation. She was right. If I said no, she would blow up the family. She would wage a war of attrition that would drag my grandmother into the crossfire. She had all the leverage. She had the toxic normal on her side. A strange, quiet calmness suddenly washed over me. The burning fury in my chest didn't disappear, but it compressed, hardening into a diamond-sharp point of absolute clarity. They wanted my house. They wanted to ignore the laws of logistics, municipal codes, and basic human decency. They thought the rules didn't apply to them because they were authentic and aesthetic. Okay, I thought, let's see how aesthetic a city code violation is. You know what? I said, forcing the corners of my mouth up into what I hoped looked like a concessionary smile. You're right, I'm overreacting. It's your special day. Chloe blinked, stunned by my sudden capitulation. Really? Really? I said, my voice smooth, even and terrifyingly calm. Family helps family. You want the yard, it's yours. You want me to handle the catering and the cleanup. Consider it my wedding gift. I will be your head of staff. Oh my God, Chloe shrieked, launching herself forward and wrapping her arms around my neck in a suffocating hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I promise it's going to be the most beautiful aesthetic wedding the internet has ever seen. You won't regret this. I know I won't, I said, gently peeling her off me and looking her dead in the eye. Now we have a lot of planning to do. Let's talk about this custom canvas tent you rented. The conversation about the custom canvas tent was merely the opening skirmish in what would quickly become a grueling, weeks-long occupation of my life. I had assumed naively that having secured my property and my forced labor, Chloe and Aunt Karen would retreat to their own home to finalize the details. Instead, they treated my capitulation as an open invitation to annex my house. Within 48 hours, my quiet, immaculate sanctuary was transformed into a chaotic, beige-toned war room. It started with the boxes. Amazon packages, Ulan shipments, and unmarked crates from obscure Etsy sellers began arriving in waves, piling up on my front porch until they formed a corrugated cardboard barricade. I was forced to haul them inside myself, stacking them in the living room because Chloe claimed she needed them on site for spatial visualization. My house began to smell overwhelmingly of dried eucalyptus, synthetic vanilla, and the sharp, metallic tang of cheap wire framing used for floral arches. Then came the physical occupation. Chloe decided that her childhood bedroom at Aunt Karen's house lacked the creative energy necessary for final stage wedding prep. So she simply started showing up at my house at 9 in the morning, letting herself in with the gate code, and spreading her mood boards, fabric swatches, and seating charts across my massive, custom-built kitchen island. She would sit there for hours, sipping iced lattes she expected me to offer her, playing a curated playlist of breathy, acoustic indie pop covers on her portable speaker at a volume that made it impossible for me to focus on my actual paying job. Even Braden, her cardboard cutout of a fiancé, began to materialize. He would wander into my backyard, wearing perfectly ironed neutral chinos, and stand next to my koi pond, staring blankly at the water as if waiting for it to do a trick. Whenever I asked him a direct question about the wedding logistics, he would offer a vacant smile and say, "Whatever Chloe wants, man, happy wife, happy life, right? I'm just here for the vibes." It was infuriating. I was hosting a 200-person event that I was apparently catering and cleaning up after, and the groom was treating my property like a public botanical garden. The guest list was the first major battle line to be drawn after my surrender. During our initial confrontation, Karen had casually tossed out the number 200. I had assumed, or perhaps frantically hoped, that this was an exaggeration. People always invite more guests than they expect to attend, relying on a standard attrition rate. But a week into the occupation, Chloe triumphantly slammed a leather-bound, embossed planner onto my kitchen island. "Final head count is in," she announced, her eyes shining with the manic glee of someone who had just won a popularity contest. 214, and that's not even counting the vendors, the photographers, and the content creation team. I slowly lowered my laptop screen. 214, I repeated, the number echoing in the vaulted ceiling of my kitchen. "Chloe, you told me 200 was the absolute maximum. You sent out save the dates to 200 people." "Well, yeah, but then I realized I couldn't leave out the girls from my Pilates studio," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "And Braden's frat brothers from college all said they were flying in, which is like 12 extra guys. And I had to invite some of the local influencers I network with. It's a networking opportunity, honestly. It's an investment in my brand." "Where are they going to sit?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. "The stone patio is large, Chloe, but it is not a stadium. It maxes out at maybe 80 people for a seated dinner. If you put a canvas tent over it, you lose even more square footage to the structural poles." "Oh, we aren't doing a seated dinner," she laughed, as if I had just suggested something charmingly antiquated, like arriving in a horse-drawn carriage. "Seated dinners are so stiff, so boomer. We're doing a flowing reception. People will mingle. They can sit on the retaining walls or we'll throw some vintage Persian rugs and floor cushions on the grass. It's going to be a totally fluid, organic experience." A fluid, organic experience, I repeated. I closed my eyes and massaged the bridge of my nose, feeling a migraine beginning to pulse rhythmically behind my retinas. I had spent the last 3 days researching, not floral arrangements or beige table runners, but municipal codes. When I bought this property and began the massive, multi-year landscaping project, I had to pull permits. I had to learn exactly what the city of Cherkasy allowed and what it forbade. I knew the zoning map. I knew the setback requirements. And I knew with absolute terrifying certainty that hosting 214 people in a residential zone without a permit was the legal equivalent of lighting a distress flare in front of a police station. I opened a drawer in the kitchen island and pulled out a thick manila folder I had compiled. I set it down on the quartz countertop, directly on top of her mood board. "What is this?" Chloe asked, wrinkling her nose as if the plain folder offended her aesthetic sensibilities. "This," I said, leaning forward, "is reality. If you are going to force me to host this circus, we are going to do it legally or we are not doing it at all." "Sit down." Chloe blinked, taken aback by the sudden shift in my tone. She reluctantly pulled out a bar stool and sat, crossing her arms defensively. "You're using your aggressive voice again. It's very triggering." "I am using my pragmatic voice," I corrected her. "Let's start with the guest count. 214 people. According to the city municipal code, any private gathering on residential property exceeding 50 people requires a special event permit. It costs $300, requires a 30-day review period, and mandates a sign-off from the local precinct regarding traffic management." Chloe scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Are you kidding? I am not paying the city $300 to have a party in a backyard. That is literally extortion. It's private property, we can do whatever we want." "No, you can't," I said, tapping the folder. "The moment you exceed 50 cars parking on this narrow, winding suburban street, you become a public nuisance. The street is a fire lane. If 200 people try to park here, emergency vehicles won't be able to get through. The police will show up and they will start towing cars. Your organic experience will turn into a mass impound lot. People can just Uber," she insisted, her voice rising in pitch, "or carpool. You're just looking for problems where there aren't any." "I am looking at the law," I countered. Point 2, the noise ordinance. Residential noise restrictions mandate that amplified sound must be turned down to a conversational level by 9 p.m. You have an acoustic band and a Bluetooth speaker system. You plan to party until midnight, unless you apply for a noise variance, which requires the signatures of the 8 adjoining neighbors. The cops will be called by 9:15. My neighbors are quiet, elderly people who complain when my lawnmower is too loud. They will absolutely ruin your vibe. "Then you go talk to them," Chloe demanded, slamming her hand on the counter. "You're their neighbor. Bring them some banana bread or whatever and tell them to wear earplugs for one night. I am not ending my wedding at 9 o'clock like a toddler's birthday party. I am not begging my neighbors to tolerate a nightclub in my backyard so you don't have to fill out a form," I said coldly. "But let's move on to point 3 because this is the big one, the tent." I opened the folder and pulled out a printed spec sheet I had found online for the exact custom, Bohemian canvas tent she had rented. It was massive, 40 by 60 feet, made of heavy treated canvas, suspended by massive wooden center poles. "You rented a commercial-grade enclosed structure," I said. "You are planning to put it over the patio. You are also planning to have grazing stations beneath this tent. Let me ask you, how are you keeping the food warm?" "With chafing dishes," Chloe said, rolling her eyes as if I were incredibly dense. "Mom bought those little metal cans of fire, sternos. We're doing a massive taco bar and a fondue station. You want to light dozens of open-flame sternos underneath a highly flammable canvas tent, surrounded by 200 people with a single narrow exit," I stated flatly. "Chloe, the fire marshal will have an absolute stroke. If you erect a tent of that size and introduce open flames, it requires a mandatory fire safety inspection. You need commercial fire extinguishers every 20 feet, and the tent must have certified illuminated exit signs. If you don't have this and someone knocks over a fondue pot, you won't just ruin a wedding. You will burn my house down, and we will both go to prison for gross negligence." For a second, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed Chloe's face. She looked at the printed spec sheet, then up at me. For a brief shining moment, I thought reason had finally penetrated the thick, impenetrable armor of her entitlement. But then she shook her head, her face hardening into a familiar mask of stubborn denial. "You're being dramatic," she snapped. "People use chafing dishes in tents all the time. I've seen it on Pinterest. The tent is treated for fire resistance. It says so on the website. I am not calling the fire marshal." They'll just try to force me to rent those ugly red fire extinguishers and put up those hideous glowing red exit signs. Do you know what a glowing red exit sign will do to the ambient lighting of my photos? It will completely wash out the sepia tones. You care more about the sepia tones than the fact that your guests could be trapped in a burning canvas death trap, I asked, genuinely astounded by the depths of her vanity. It's not going to burn down, she shrieked. Stop manifesting negativity. If you keep putting that energy out there, you're going to attract it. Gravity and fire do not care about your energy, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping an octave. And finally, point 4, the most critical point of all, the plumbing. I pulled out the last piece of paper. It was a schematic of my property's septic system. This house operates on a standard residential septic tank in a drain field, I explained, tracing the diagram with my finger. It is designed to handle the waste output of 3 to 4 people on a daily basis. It can handle a dinner party of maybe 20 people for a few hours. It cannot, under any circumstances, handle the biological output of 214 people drinking alcohol and eating Costco taco meat for 8 straight hours. Chloe physically recoiled, covering her ears with her hands. Stop, I told you I am not talking about toilets. It is disgusting and I don't want to hear about it. You have to hear about it, I barked, pulling her hands away from her ears. If 200 people use my 2 bathrooms, the tank will flood. The drain field will saturate. Raw sewage will literally bubble up into the bathtubs, overflow onto the bathroom floors, and seep into the hardwood. It will destroy the first floor of my house, and the smell will permeate the entire property. You must rent luxury portable restroom trailers. They cost about $1,500. They park on the street, they have their own water and holding tanks, and they look like normal bathrooms inside. But they are non-negotiable. If you do not rent them, I will physically lock the doors to the main house and your guests can use the woods. That was the breaking point. Chloe jumped up from the bar stool, her face contorted in a mask of absolute fury. Tears of pure, unadulterated rage spilled over her eyelashes, ruining her carefully applied mascara. $1,500, she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly against the tile backsplash. I don't have $1,500. I spent the rest of my budget on the floral arch and the custom monogrammed napkins. And I am absolutely not putting an ugly, massive trailer in front of the house. It will ruin the entire establishing shot of the arrival video. You are doing this on purpose. I am trying to save my house and your wedding, I shouted back, finally losing my grip on the forced, calm demeanor. No, you aren't, she sobbed, grabbing her mood board and clutching it to her chest like a shield. You've hated this idea from the start. You're just throwing all these stupid bureaucratic rules and legal threats at me because you want me to fail. You want my wedding to be ugly and ruined so you can sit in your big, empty, lonely house and feel superior to everyone else. You're a miserable, jealous hater. Chloe, these are not my rules, they are the city's laws. I don't care about the city, she wailed, stomping her foot like a petulant child. I don't care about the permits or the fire marshals or your stupid, fragile plumbing. I am the bride, it is my day. You promised me I could use the venue, and now you're trying to ruin it with all this red tape. Well, I'm not doing it. I'm not paying for permits, I'm not renting porta potties, and I'm not dimming my light just because you can't handle my vision. She spun around, practically sprinting toward the front door. She threw it open, not bothering to close it behind her, and ran down the driveway to her car. I stood in the kitchen, listening to the aggressive roar of her engine as she peeled out of the cul-de-sac, leaving the heavy, suffocating scent of eucalyptus and tension hanging in the air. I stared at the manila folder on the counter. I had laid out the facts. I had given her the exact blueprint of how to avoid a disaster. I had practically handed her the playbook for a successful legal event. And she had rejected all of it because an illuminated exit sign would ruin her photos. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. Precisely 14 minutes later, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Then it buzzed again and again. The rapid-fire vibrations rattled against the quartz like a machine gun. I picked it up. The family group chat, which I had unwisely unmuted during the initial surrender, was exploding. Aunt Karen was at the helm, deploying a masterclass in weaponized victimhood and character assassination. Karen, I am absolutely shaking right now. Chloe just got home in hysterics. She can barely breathe. I hope you're happy. You've completely broken a young bride's heart over absolutely nothing. Uncle Dave, what the hell is going on? I thought the venue was settled. Karen, it was Dave. But apparently Op has decided to hold Chloe's dream day hostage unless we pay thousands of dollars in fake permit fees and rent disgusting construction site toilets to put in the driveway. Op is trying to price us out of using the yard. Aunt Susan, that is so cruel. Op, you have plenty of money. Why are you forcing this poor girl to jump through legal hoops for a family party? It's just a backyard barbecue basically. Stop being such a control freak. Cousin Mark, typical op, always has to be the smartest person in the room. Just let her have her party, man. Don't be a dick, Karen. She is demanding we call the fire department on our own wedding. She is literally threatening to lock the doors to the house so elderly relatives can't use the bathroom. It is sick. It is a sick, jealous power trip. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I started typing furiously. I am trying to stop the city from shutting the wedding down. I am trying to stop a fire hazard. My septic tank cannot hold 200 people. I stared at the words I had typed. I looked at the barrage of messages flooding the screen, a tidal wave of willful ignorance and blind loyalty to Karen's narrative. They didn't care about the truth. They didn't care about the logistics. They only cared about maintaining the toxic status quo. If I sent that message, it would just be more fuel for their fire. They would argue, they would gaslight, they would drag my grandmother into it. They had already decided I was the villain. Nothing I said would change their minds. They wanted to operate in a fantasy world where actions had no consequences and municipal laws bowed to Instagram aesthetics. Slowly, deliberately, I deleted the message. I didn't type a defense, I didn't justify myself. Instead, I turned off the screen, placed the phone face down on the counter, and looked out the massive bay window toward my backyard. The evening sun was casting long, golden shadows across the weeping willows. The koi pond rippled gently in the breeze. It was beautiful, it was perfect. A slow, terrifying realization began to bloom in my chest. A dark, jagged piece of logic that settled into place with a satisfying metallic click. I couldn't stop them. I couldn't reason with them. If I fought them, I would lose my family, stress my grandmother to death, and be painted as a monster for the rest of my life. They demanded to throw an illegal, unpermitted, highly hazardous commercial event on my property, and they absolutely refused to take any protective measures. They wanted all the aesthetic glory with zero responsibility. They thought I was trapped, but as I stood there in the quiet of my home, surrounded by Chloe's chaotic wedding debris, I realized I wasn't trapped at all. They had just handed me the keys to their own destruction. If they were so desperately eager to walk blindly into a legal and financial minefield, why was I trying so hard to hold them back? Why was I sacrificing my peace to save them from themselves? If they wanted to dance in the minefield, the least I could do was buy them the music. I picked up the manila folder filled with the city codes, the noise ordinances, and the fire marshal regulations. I tapped the edges against the counter, straightening the papers perfectly. I didn't need to fight them anymore. I just needed to step entirely out of the way, legally shield myself from the blast radius, and let the sheer, crushing weight of reality do exactly what reality does best. I opened my laptop, pulling up a blank document. The headache behind my eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. It was time to stop being the voice of reason. It was time to smile, nod, and agree to absolutely everything. It was time to let Chloe have exactly the wedding she demanded. The cursor blinked on the blank white document, a rhythmic, hypnotic pulse that mirrored the steady, calming thrum of my own heartbeat. The suffocating fog of anger that had clouded my judgment for the past 2 weeks had entirely evaporated, leaving behind a pristine, arctic clarity. I wasn't just a homeowner trying to protect my grass anymore. I was a tactician preparing for a siege. If my cousin and my aunt were absolutely determined to hurl themselves off a legal and financial cliff, my only remaining obligation was to ensure I wasn't roped to their waists when they jumped. I needed a shield, a legally binding, ironclad, irrefutable shield. I spent the next 4 hours drafting the document. I didn't just type up a casual agreement. I channeled every ounce of corporate jargon and legal phrasing I had ever encountered in my professional career. I titled it in bold, imposing Arial font, Venue Use Agreement, Assumption of Risk, and Total Indemnification Clause. It was a masterpiece of malicious compliance. The document explicitly established a landlord-tenant framework for a single 48-hour period. In the first section, it clearly stated that I, the property owner, was providing the raw land as is, completely free of charge, and was acting in absolutely no official capacity as an organizer, planner, or sponsor of the event. The second section was the trap. It explicitly named Chloe as the sole event director and host. It stated in unambiguous terminology that the host acknowledged being informed of all local, county, and state ordinances regarding noise, traffic, waste management, and fire safety. It contained a clause stating that the host assumed 100% of the responsibility for acquiring any and all necessary municipal permits. But the coup de grace was the indemnification clause. It mandated that Chloe and her estate would hold me totally harmless and entirely legally and financially indemnified against any municipal citations. fines, property damage, police actions, or civil liabilities resulting from the event. It effectively transferred every single ounce of the risk onto her shoulders. I printed 2 copies on heavy professional stock paper. I read them over, checking for loopholes, and found none. It was a flawless contract. But a contract is worthless without a signature. I needed her to sign it, and more importantly, I needed her to sign it without reading it. To achieve that, I had to swallow my pride and deliver the performance of a lifetime. I picked up my phone, navigated to the still smoldering family group chat, and typed out my surrender. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I let my anxiety about my house get the better of me, and I lost sight of what's really important here. Family, Chloe, I am so sorry for acting like a control freak. It's your day, it's your vision, and I want to support you. Let's do it your way. Please come over tonight so we can finalize everything. I'll make dinner. The response was immediate. The flying monkeys in the group chat instantly reversed course, showering me with digital applause. Aunt Karen replied with a string of heart emojis, proclaiming that she knew I would eventually see the light and embrace my family duties. Chloe texted me privately, a sickly sweet message about how the universe was finally aligning for her aesthetic journey. I went to the kitchen and cooked a massive, elaborate pasta dinner. When the doorbell rang at 6 o'clock, I took a deep breath, plastered a warm, apologetic smile onto my face, and opened the door. Chloe and Aunt Karen swept in like conquering royalty. There was no hesitation, no lingering tension on their end. They had won, and they were ready to bask in the spoils of their victory. Karen patted my cheek affectionately, her rings cold against my skin, while Chloe immediately dropped her massive, embossed wedding planner onto the dining table. I have to say, Karen purred as I served the pasta, I was worried there for a minute. You really had us thinking you were going to ruin the whole thing over some silly portable toilets. But I told Chloe, I said, Op is family, Op will step up. And look at you stepping up. I just wanted to make sure everything was perfect. I lied smoothly, pouring them both a generous glass of red wine. I realized now that my rules were stifling the vibe. If you want to do the grazing stations and the custom tent and let people use the house bathrooms, we'll make it work. I'll handle the catering prep just like you asked. Chloe beamed, taking a massive gulp of her wine. See, this is what I'm talking about, good energy. The universe always provides when you set your intentions. We spent an hour going over her delusional plans. I nodded enthusiastically as she explained how I would need to begin rolling 300 miniature meatballs at dawn on the day of the wedding. I took meticulous notes as she diagrammed exactly where the open-flame chafing dishes would sit underneath the highly flammable canvas tent. I was the perfect subservient host. When dessert was finished and they were thoroughly relaxed and flush with wine and victory, I casually slid the printed contract across the table, along with a sleek black pen. What's this? Chloe asked, barely glancing at the bold header. Just a boring administrative thing, I said, waving my hand dismissively. My homeowner's insurance policy is throwing a fit about having over 200 people on the property. They threatened to drop my coverage if I didn't have something on file showing that this is a private, family-run event and not a commercial venue I'm profiting from. It basically just says you're the one throwing the party, not me. Karen squinted at the paper. Insurance companies are such a scam, always trying to squeeze out of paying for anything. Is this going to cost us money? Not a dime, I assured her, my voice perfectly light and conversational. It's purely bureaucratic nonsense. You know how these corporate algorithms are. It just checks a box so they leave me alone. Chloe didn't even read the first paragraph. She was too high on her own power, too utterly convinced of her own untouchable status. She grabbed the pen and scrawled her loopy, heart-dotted signature on the bottom line of both copies. There, she said, sliding them back. Can we talk about the floral arch now? Because I really think we need to weave more pampas grass into the left side. Absolutely, I said, taking the documents. Wait, I should witness it, Karen said, reaching out. To make it super official for your insurance guys. She grabbed the pen and signed her own name right beneath Chloe's, cementing her own involvement in the liability trap. I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile that they entirely misinterpreted as familial warmth. I took the contracts, walked into my home office, and locked them inside my fireproof safe. The trap was set. The steel jaws were open. All I had to do now was build the bait and wait. The final 2 weeks leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in psychological compartmentalization. To the outside world, to Chloe, Karen, and the extended family, I was the dutiful, hardworking cousin. I allowed them to completely take over my kitchen. I let Karen fill my 2 massive refrigerators with hundreds of dollars of Costco bulk groceries. I I spent my evenings meticulously prepping their boho grazing station elements, slicing pounds of artisanal cheeses, marinating chicken skewers, and smiling as Chloe barked orders at me about the exact, rustic aesthetic she required for the charcuterie boards. But in the shadows, out of their line of sight, I was aggressively fortifying my castle. My first priority was physical security. I knew that when a chaotic event goes horribly wrong, a mob mentality can quickly set in. 200 angry, inconvenienced people could easily cause thousands of dollars in property damage. I spent a Saturday morning installing 4 new high-definition security cameras. I put one on the eaves overlooking the driveway, one scanning the street, and 2 covering the entire expanse of the backyard patio and the koi pond. When Chloe noticed them and asked, I gave her the excuse I had prepared. Oh, those. I put them up so we could capture alternate angles of the wedding. You know, a wide, sweeping time lapse of the whole party coming together for the brand. She squealed in delight, entirely oblivious to the fact that she was enthusiastically endorsing the very surveillance system that would record her downfall in stunning 4K resolution. Next was the house itself. I had warned them about the septic system, and they had ignored me. I was not going to allow 214 people to destroy my plumbing and flood my home with raw sewage. I called a locksmith and had heavy-duty commercial-grade smart locks installed on every single interior door that led away from the kitchen and the mudroom. The hallways leading to my master suite, the guest bathrooms, the basement, all secured behind steel deadbolts and randomized keypad codes. When the day of the wedding arrived, the only accessible areas of the house would be the kitchen for my catering duties and the back patio. If a guest needed a bathroom, they would find locked doors and silence. It was going to be a disaster for Chloe, but my hardwood floors would remain pristine. Finally, I handled the vehicle situation. My driveway could hold 4 cars comfortably. Chloe had already claimed those spots for the bridal party arrival. I knew that 200 guests would immediately choke the narrow cul-de-sac, parking on lawns, blocking driveways, and creating a massive, immovable gridlock. To ensure my own vehicles weren't trapped in the ensuing chaos, or accidentally sideswiped by an angry guest trying to flee a towing truck, I drove my car and my restored vintage truck to a secure, long-term parking garage 3 towns over. I took an Uber back to my house. I was officially locked in. 3 days before the wedding, the logistical monstrosity arrived. A massive diesel box truck backed up into my driveway, crushing the edge of my flower bed, and 4 exhausted-looking workers began unloading the custom canvas tent. I stood on the back porch, drinking coffee, watching as they erected it over my stone patio. It was terrifying. It was exactly as massive as the spec sheet had claimed, 40 feet wide by 60 feet long. It was held up by thick, heavy wooden center poles and secured by thick ropes staked deep into my lawn. It effectively enclosed the entire patio, trapping the air and creating a massive canvas cavern. There was no ventilation. There were no emergency exits, only the main opening at the front. I watched as Chloe directed the rental workers, making them move the heavy wooden tables underneath the tent. I watched as she instructed them to set up the long buffet tables, the exact tables where in 3 days she planned to light 24 open-flame sterno cans. It wasn't just a code violation anymore. Looking at the sheer volume of treated canvas and dry wood, it was a legitimate death trap. If one drunk guest tripped and knocked a table over, the entire structure would go up like a Roman candle in under 2 minutes. Any lingering guilt I might have harbored about what I was about to do vanished, burned away by the sheer, staggering reality of her negligence. It was Thursday morning, 48 hours before the ceremony. The house was empty. Chloe and Karen were off getting their nails done and finalizing the floral arrangements. The massive tent sat silently in my backyard, a monument to their hubris. I sat down at my kitchen island, opened my laptop, and brought up the directory for the City of Cherkasy municipal offices. I took a deep breath, picked up my phone, and dialed the first number. Code Enforcement and Zoning, how can I direct your call? A bored, nasal voice answered. Hi there, I said, modulating my voice to sound polite but deeply concerned. I need to speak to an enforcement officer regarding a massive, unpermitted commercial event being set up in a residential zone. I believe it's going to severely disrupt the neighborhood this weekend. I was transferred to an officer named Davis. He sounded tired, clearly accustomed to neighbors complaining about overgrown lawns or fences built 2 inches over a property line. What's the issue, sir? Davis asked. I am calling to report an illegal commercial-scale gathering planned for this Saturday at 4 p.m., I said, reading from the notes I had meticulously prepared. The address is 42 Willow Creek Drive. There are currently over 210 guests expected to attend. There are no special event permits filed, no traffic mitigation plans, and no portable sanitation facilities provided for a gathering of this size on a residential septic system. The scratching of a pen on the other end of the line stopped. The boredom vanished from Davis's voice, replaced by the sharp, focused tone of a bureaucrat who had just been handed a massive, easy citation on a silver platter. 200 people, Davis repeated, on Willow Creek. That's a tight cul-de-sac, sir. Are you the property owner? I am, I confirmed. I have entirely lost control of the situation. A family member has commandeered the property for an influencer wedding and is refusing to comply with any municipal codes. They have blatantly stated they intend to ignore the noise ordinances with amplified sound well past midnight. I want to go on record that I do not authorize this lack of compliance, and I am requesting an enforcement officer to break up the gathering before my property is destroyed. We don't take kindly to people circumventing the permit process for massive events, sir, Davis said, his tone grim. We'll have an officer out there on Saturday afternoon to assess the situation. If there are 200 people there, we will be issuing immediate citations and an order to disperse. Thank you, Officer Davis. They plan to start the vows precisely at 4:30 p.m. I hung up, the first domino was in motion. I immediately dialed the second number. Cherkasy Fire Department, Fire Marshal's office. Hello, I said, my voice dropping into a register of urgent, immediate alarm. I am calling to report an extremely dangerous, unpermitted structure and an active fire hazard being prepared for an event this Saturday. Go ahead, sir, what is the address? I gave him the address. There is currently a 40 by 60 enclosed canvas tent erected on the property. It was erected without a fire inspection. There are 0 illuminated exit signs and no commercial fire extinguishers on site. An unpermitted tent of that size is a serious violation, the dispatcher noted. Is there any heat source or cooking equipment planned for inside the structure? Yes, I said, leaning in. They are planning to host a grazing buffet for over 200 people directly underneath the canvas. They are intending to ignite upwards of 24 open-flame chafing dish fuels, sternos, on wooden tables inside the tent. Furthermore, the property's narrow street will be entirely blocked by illegal parking, meaning if that tent catches fire, your fire engines will not be able to physically reach the house. There was a heavy, profound silence on the other end of the line. The fire marshal's office does not mess around. Code enforcement will fine you. The fire marshal will shut you down with the wrath of God. Sir, the dispatcher said, his voice entirely devoid of any casualness. Open flames inside an unpermitted, non-inspected canvas structure with 200 occupants and blocked emergency access is a catastrophic hazard. What time does this event begin? Guests arrive at 4 p.m. The flames will likely be lit by the caterers around 4:15 p.m. for the cocktail hour. We will have inspectors on site, he promised, the gravity in his voice absolute. Do not let them light those flames. I will do my best, I replied and hung up 2 dominoes. I took a sip of my coffee, my hands perfectly steady. I dialed the third and final number. Police non-emergency dispatch. Hi, I'm calling to issue a preemptive traffic and parking warning for the Willow Creek cul-de-sac this Saturday afternoon. There is an illegal, unpermitted event taking place at number 42. Over 200 guests have been instructed to park on the street. The street is a designated fire lane. If that many cars attempt to park here, it will become entirely impassable for emergency vehicles, and residents will be trapped in their driveways. We appreciate the heads up, the dispatcher said. We'll send parking enforcement and a few patrol units to do a sweep around 4:15. If cars are blocking fire hydrants or parked illegally, they will be ticketed and towed at the owner's expense. Thank you, I said. I just wanted to make sure the neighborhood stays safe. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the quartz countertop. It was done. The trap was no longer just a legal document in a safe. It was a living, breathing bureaucratic machine, hurtling toward my house with unstoppable momentum. I had given all 3 agencies the exact same timeline. At precisely 4:15 p.m. on Saturday, a perfect storm of municipal fury would descend upon my property. Friday night arrived, bringing with it the eerie electric calm before a hurricane. The rehearsal dinner was being held at Aunt Karen's house, leaving me entirely alone on my property for the first time in weeks. I walked out the back door and stood on the edge of the stone patio. The Edison lights I had meticulously strung years ago were illuminated, casting a warm, amber glow over the massive white canvas of the tent. Beneath it, dozens of wooden folding chairs were arranged in perfect, symmetrical rows, facing a grotesque, towering arch made of dried pampas grass and synthetic white roses. Along the perimeter, the long banquet tables were set up. I walked over to them. The silver chafing dishes were lined up, gleaming in the low light. Underneath each one sat a small, unopened can of highly flammable sterno gel waiting for a match. It looked exactly like the Pinterest boards Chloe had shoved in my face for a month. It was a perfect beige cottagecore dream, suspended in fragile, highly combustible amber. I walked back inside the house, locking the heavy iron gate behind me. I went into the kitchen, opened the massive industrial refrigerators, and stared at the mountain of raw ingredients I was expected to cook tomorrow. Dozens of pounds of beef, massive aluminum trays of macaroni and cheese, hundreds of miniature quiches. I would cook them. I would wake up at 6 in the morning and I would fulfill my end of the bargain. I would play the perfect caterer. I would wear an apron, I would smile, and I would arrange the appetizers with the delicate, artistic flair of a Michelin star chef. I would help Chloe construct her perfect aesthetic illusion right up until the very second the sirens shattered the air. I walked through the house, testing the heavy-duty smart locks on the hallway doors. One by one, I entered the override code, listening to the heavy steel deadbolts slide into place with a satisfying, resolute clack. The bathrooms were secured, the bedrooms were secured, the fortress was sealed. I went up to my second-floor master bedroom, which overlooked the entire front yard and the street. I stood at the window, looking down at the empty, peaceful cul-de-sac bathed in the pale light of the street lamps. Tomorrow, this street would be a war zone. Tomorrow, Chloe would stand under her highly flammable tent, wearing her custom gown, broadcasting to her 15,000 followers, utterly convinced that the world bent to her will. Tomorrow, Aunt Karen would look at me with that smug, victorious smile, believing she had finally broken me, finally put the ghost in his place. I pulled the curtains closed, a cold, hard smile spreading across my face. Let them come, let the guests arrive. Let the cameras roll. The stage was set, the audience was entirely oblivious, and I was going to give them a show they would never, ever forget. My alarm clock did not wake me on the morning of the wedding. The aggressive, rhythmic pounding of a meat cleaver echoing in my own subconscious did. I opened my eyes at precisely 5 o'clock in the morning. The house was pitch black, wrapped in the profound, suffocating silence that precedes a catastrophe. Today was the day. I lay in bed for a long moment, staring up at the ceiling, feeling the cold, hard reality of what I was about to execute settling into my bones. There was no hesitation left. Only the meticulous, mechanical focus of a man who had entirely surrendered to the inevitability of the storm. I swung my legs out of bed, dressed in comfortable, dark clothes, and walked downstairs to my kitchen. The sheer volume of raw ingredients Aunt Karen had shoved into my industrial refrigerators was staggering. To maintain my cover as the subservient, beaten-down cousin, I had to deliver on my promise. I tied a heavy canvas apron around my waist, sharpened my chef's knife, and went to work. For the next 4 hours, I operated like a machine on a commercial assembly line. I rolled 300 miniature meatballs by hand, my fingers slick with raw beef and breadcrumbs. I chopped mountains of onions, garlic, and peppers until my eyes burned and my hands cramped. I arranged vast, sprawling wooden boards with intricate folds of prosciutto, perfectly angled slices of artisanal cheddar, and delicate, annoying little clusters of organic grapes. The kitchen quickly became a sauna, the massive double ovens radiating waves of intense heat as I baked tray after tray of miniature quiches and bacon-wrapped dates. I was sweating through my shirt, my feet aching against the hardwood floors, but every time the physical exhaustion threatened to break my spirit, I just looked out the bay window at the massive, white canvas death trap sitting on my patio, and the exhaustion evaporated into pure crystalline adrenaline. At 9 in the morning, the invasion began. The heavy iron gate buzzed, and Aunt Karen's SUV tore up my driveway, parking entirely on my meticulously manicured front lawn to make room for the bridal party. The front door burst open, and a tsunami of chaotic, shrill energy flooded my home. Chloe swept into the foyer followed by 6 bridesmaids, 2 heavily tattooed hair and makeup artists pulling massive rolling suitcases, and a frantic, sweaty woman holding an iPad who I assumed was the designated content coordinator. Chloe was already in full, terrifying bridezilla mode. She was wearing a white silk robe with wifey embroidered in aggressive, cursive gold lettering across the back. "Up," she barked, not even offering a greeting as she marched into my kitchen, her eyes frantically scanning the countertops. "Where is the mimosa bar?" I explicitly put the mimosa bar on the timeline for 9:15. My content girl needs to get a hyperlapse of us cheering in our robes, and we can't do that without the aesthetically appropriate glassware. "The champagne is chilling in the secondary fridge," I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of any friction. The crystal flutes are on the dining room table, flanked by the carafes of organic, pulp-free orange juice. She paused, blinking in mild surprise at my utter compliance, before nodding sharply. Good. Make sure the charcuterie boards are covered with damp paper towels. If the Gouda sweats before the cocktail hour, it will completely ruin the flat lay photos. For the next 5 hours, my house was subjected to an occupying force of unprecedented vanity. The heavy scent of burning hair, industrial-strength aerosol hairspray, and cheap, sugary champagne permeated every square inch of the first floor. The bridesmaids shrieked and gossiped, taking thousands of selfies in front of my bay windows. Braden and his groomsmen arrived around noon, reeking of cheap body spray and stale beer, and immediately retreated to the back patio to smoke cigars, dropping the ashes directly onto my Pennsylvania bluestone. I watched it all happen, standing over the hot stove, flipping skewers of marinated chicken, nodding subserviently whenever Karen barked an order at me to refill the ice buckets. I was the invisible help in my own home. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the suffocating heat of the late summer day was at its peak. The air outside was thick, stagnant, and completely devoid of a breeze. Underneath the massive, unventilated canvas tent on the patio, it felt like a tropical terrarium. Aunt Susan, who had been drafted as my assistant, waddled into the kitchen, wiping sweat from her forehead. Okay, Op, the catering tables are set up under the tent. We need to get the hot food out there now, so people can start grazing as soon as the ceremony is over. I carried the massive, heavy aluminum trays of hot food out to the patio. The temperature beneath the tent was instantly oppressive. The heavy canvas trapped the heat of the sun, baking the air beneath it. I set the trays down onto the wooden banquet tables, locking them into the wire chafing racks. All right, Aunt Karen said, marching over with a long-handled grill lighter. Let's get these fired up. I stood back and watched as my aunt moved down the line of tables. Click, whoosh, she ignited the first can of sterno gel. The invisible blue flame flared up instantly, casting a wave of pure, concentrated heat upward, directly heating the aluminum water pans. Click, whoosh, she lit the second, then the third, then the 10th. Within minutes, there were 24 open, highly concentrated fires burning on top of dry wooden tables, directly beneath a highly flammable, enclosed canvas ceiling. The heat radiating off the buffet line was physically uncomfortable. There was no fire extinguisher in sight. There was no illuminated exit sign. It was a spectacular monument to their arrogant negligence. I didn't say a word to stop them. I just stared at the little blue flames, checked my watch, and retreated into the house. It was 3:30 p.m. The first cars began to arrive. From my kitchen window, I had a perfect, elevated view of the cul-de-sac. It started as a trickle 3 or 4 sedans pulling up to the curb, but within 15 minutes it escalated into a vehicular catastrophe. Chloe's guest list of 214 people meant roughly 100 individual vehicles, all converging on a narrow, dead-end suburban street, designed to accommodate maybe 20 parked cars. The street choked instantly. Guests, already sweating in their formal wear and irritated by the lack of clear direction, simply began abandoning their cars wherever they pleased. They parked diagonally across driveways, trapping my elderly neighbors inside their homes. They drove their heavy SUVs straight over the concrete curbs, parking deeply into the manicured front lawns of the surrounding houses. Two massive pickup trucks parked directly in front of the bright yellow fire hydrants. The narrow, two-lane street was compressed into a jagged, impassable zigzag of metal. Horns began to blare as arriving guests found themselves trapped behind departing Ubers. Through the window, I could see my neighbor, Mr. Henderson, standing on his porch in his bathrobe, waving his cane and screaming furiously at a group of 20-somethings who had just crushed his prize-winning hydrangeas with a rented Tesla. The chaos had officially breached the perimeter. The guests began filtering through the side gate, pouring into my backyard like a heavily perfumed, pastel-colored swarm of locusts. They trampled over my flower beds to get to the patio. They threw empty water bottles into my koi pond. The sheer volume of human bodies packed underneath the canvas tent drove the temperature up even further. The air was a cacophony of loud, obnoxious laughter, clinking glasses, and the thumping bass of the acoustic band tuning their instruments. And then, precisely at 4 o'clock p.m., the biological reality of 200 drinking adults finally crashed headfirst into Chloe's aesthetic delusion. A line began to form in the mudroom, leading into the main hallway of my house. Women in tight, uncomfortable dresses and men sweating through their suits were shifting their weight from foot to foot, glaring at the heavy oak door that separated the kitchen from the rest of the house. Aunt Karen pushed her way through the growing, agitated crowd, her face flushed with panic. She grabbed the handle of the hallway door and yanked. It didn't budge. The heavy-duty commercial deadbolt held firm. She punched the handle, rattling it violently. "Up!" she shrieked, spinning around to find me calmly wiping down the kitchen counters with a microfiber cloth. "The door is jammed. The guests need to use the restrooms before the ceremony starts." I looked up, plastering a look of profound, helpless confusion onto my face. "Jammed? Let me see." I walked over, brushing past the line of desperate, sweating guests, and examined the sleek, black digital keypad of the smart lock. The screen was dark. "Oh no," I breathed out loud enough for the crowd to hear. "The smart lock system, it must have crashed." "Crashed?" Karen screamed, her voice cracking in pure panic. "What do you mean crashed?" "Open it with the key." "They don't have physical keys, Aunt Karen. They run entirely on the house's Wi-Fi network." I lied effortlessly, delivering the technical jargon with absolute terrifying sincerity. "I told you yesterday, my residential router can't handle the bandwidth of 200 cell phones constantly pinging for a signal. The network has completely overloaded and shut down. The security system has automatically defaulted to its fail-secure mode. The deadbolts are magnetically locked until the network resets, which could take hours." Karen stared at me, the blood draining completely from her face. She looked at the line of 20 furious guests standing behind her, some of whom were practically doing a rain dance of sheer bladder desperation. But they have to pee," she hissed, grabbing my apron. "Where are they supposed to go?" I gently detached her claws from my canvas apron, offering her a look of deepest, most tragic sympathy. "I honestly don't know, Karen. This is exactly why I begged you to rent the luxury portable restrooms for the driveway. But Chloe said they would ruin the vibe. I guess they'll either have to hold it or drive down to the gas station on the corner." The collective groan of misery that erupted from the line of guests was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. A woman in a massive, ridiculous floral hat actually stomped her foot and yelled, "Are you kidding me? I drove 2 hours for this and there's no toilet." "I have to go get ready for the ceremony," I said, untying my apron and tossing it onto the counter. "Good luck, Karen." I left her standing there, entirely surrounded by the hostile, desperate mob she had created. I walked to the secondary stairwell off the kitchen, which bypassed the locked hallway entirely, and went up to my master suite. The heavy, soundproof door closed behind me, cutting off the chaotic roar of the first floor. The air conditioning in my room was blasting, cool and crisp. I walked into my bathroom, washed the smell of garlic and beef fat off my hands and face, and changed into a clean, perfectly tailored dark suit. I went to my private wine cooler, uncorked a bottle of a beautifully aged Pinot Noir, and poured myself a generous glass. I unlocked the French doors of my bedroom and stepped out onto the second-floor balcony. The vantage point was absolute perfection. To my left, I could look down over the backyard, seeing the entirety of the massive canvas tent, the rows of seating, and the koi pond. To my right, I had an unobstructed view of the choked, illegally parked disaster of the cul-de-sac. I was sitting in the imperial box at the Colosseum, and the gladiators were about to be fed to the lions. It was 4:15 p.m. Down below, the acoustic band plucked a soaring, melodic chord. The restless, sweating crowd finally took their seats on the wooden folding chairs. At the front of the altar, beneath the hideous pampas grass arch, stood Braden, looking like he was actively dissociating from reality. The officiant, a hipster wearing a bow tie and suspenders, stepped up to the microphone. The music swelled. The back doors of the house opened, and there she was, Chloe. She looked radiant, I had to admit. Her dress was a massive, flowing cascade of beige tulle and white lace. Her hair was perfectly curled. As she began her slow, deliberate march down the stone aisle, her designated content creator walked aggressively backward in front of her, holding a gimbal-stabilized iPhone directly in Chloe's face, broadcasting the entire majestic spectacle live to 15,000 followers on Instagram. Karen sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, entirely consumed by the triumph of the moment. She had won. She had beaten the system, conquered my boundaries, and secured the perfect aesthetic victory. Chloe reached the altar. She handed her massive, unruly bouquet to her maid of honor. She took Braden's hands. The officiant smiled, leaning into the microphone. "We are gathered here today," the officiant's voice boomed over the Bluetooth speakers, echoing across the silent, breathless backyard, "in this breathtaking, private sanctuary to witness the union of two beautiful souls." I took a slow, deep sip of the Pinot Noir. It tasted like oak, dark cherries, and absolute victory. I checked my watch. 4:25 p.m., far in the distance, barely audible over the officiant's droning monologue about curated love and intentional energy. A sound pierced the heavy summer air. A low, rising wail. Woo-woo-woo. A few guests in the back row shifted in their seats, glancing over their shoulders toward the street. The officiant ignored it, raising his hands dramatically. Chloe and Braden have written their own vows, he announced. Chloe, you may begin. Chloe sniffled delicately for the camera, pulling a piece of artisanal parchment paper from her cleavage. Braden. From the moment our energies aligned. WAAWAAWA. The sound was no longer distant. It was a deafening, aggressive, synthetic roar tearing through the suburban quiet, the unmistakable, heart-stopping blare of heavy emergency sirens. Suddenly, the pale, amber lighting of the canvas tent was violently shattered by the strobe light effect of rapidly spinning red, blue, and white emergency lights reflecting off the fabric. The aesthetic was instantly destroyed. The entire yard was bathed in the harsh, chaotic glow of an active crime scene. What is that? Chloe shrieked into the microphone, her voice a jarring screech of feedback. She dropped her parchment paper, staring in horror toward the side gate. I turned my head to look at the street. It was a magnificent, coordinated invasion. Leading the charge, driving straight over the curb and crushing half of a neighbor's azalea bush to bypass the illegally parked cars, was a massive, bright red Fire Marshal Command SUV. Right behind it was a white city code enforcement truck. And flanking them both, their sirens screaming and air horns blasting in short, aggressive bursts, were three Cherkasy police cruisers. The armada ground to a halt at the edge of my property. The doors of the vehicles flew open, and municipal fury descended. Two men in heavy, dark blue fire department uniforms stepped out of the command SUV. One of them, a man built like a brick wall, didn't even walk to the gate. He unlatched it, kicked it fully open, and marched into my backyard with the unyielding authority of a god. He took one look at the massive 40 by 60 enclosed canvas tent, then looked at the buffet tables. From 40 feet away, he saw the flickering blue flames of the sternos licking the bottoms of the chafing dishes directly under the fabric roof. Hey, the fire marshal roared, his voice completely drowning out the acoustic band, the murmuring crowd, and the remaining sirens. Who is in charge of this structure? Complete, paralyzed silence seized the wedding. 200 people froze, staring in abject terror at the furious, heavily armed men marching toward them. I said, who is in charge? The marshal bellowed, unholstering a massive, heavy-duty fire extinguisher from his belt as he sprinted toward the buffet line. Shut off that music, everyone get out from under the canvas. Evacuate the structure immediately, this is an active fire hazard, move. Chaos erupted. The illusion of the perfect cottagecore wedding shattered into a million frantic pieces. Guests screamed, shoving their wooden chairs backward, tripping over the Persian rugs as they scrambled to escape the tent. The fire marshal reached the buffet tables, yanked the chafing dishes aside with his bare, gloved hands, and aggressively blasted the open sterno flames with the fire extinguisher. A massive, suffocating cloud of white chemical powder exploded into the air, completely covering the artisanal charcuterie boards, the imported cheeses, and the massive wedding cake in a layer of toxic dust. My cake, Chloe wailed, dropping to her knees on the stone patio, her white dress instantly soaking up the dirt and spilled wine. The content creator, frozen in shock, was still pointing the gimbal at her. The 15,000 followers on Instagram Live were getting a front row seat to the catastrophe. While the fire department was securing the tent, Officer Davis from Code Enforcement marched onto the patio, holding a metal clipboard. He looked at the screaming bride on the ground, then turned his gaze to the crowd. I need to speak to the property owner or the designated event organizer immediately, Davis yelled over the din. Karen, shaking with a mixture of rage and terror, pushed her way to the front of the crowd. What is the meaning of this? She screamed, her face purple. This is a private event. You are ruining my daughter's wedding. You have no right to be here. Ma'am, are you the organizer of this event? Davis asked coldly. Yes, I am the mother of the bride, Karen shrieked. Davis clicked his pen. Ma'am, you are hosting an unpermitted commercial gathering of over 200 people in a residential zone. You have no noise variance, no special event permit, and you have erected a non-inspected, highly flammable commercial structure over open flames. You are in violation of 6 separate municipal codes. He ripped a thick, yellow carbon copy citation off his clipboard and shoved it into her chest. This event is permanently shut down. You have 30 minutes to disperse this crowd, or the police will begin making arrests for trespassing and public nuisance. Arrests, Karen gasped, clutching the yellow paper as if it were burning her hands. Before she could process the threat, a new, even more panicked wave of screaming erupted from the guests who had fled toward the front yard. I looked down at the street. The 3 police cruisers had established a blockade at the entrance of the cul-de-sac, and crawling behind them like hungry mechanical predators were 4 heavy-duty municipal tow trucks. The police officers were not messing around. They were walking down the line of illegally parked cars. aggressively slapping bright orange parking citations onto the windshields, while the tow operators immediately began backing up to the vehicles blocking the fire hydrants. My Lexus, a man in a tuxedo, screamed from the driveway, watching in horror as a tow truck hoisted the front end of his luxury sedan into the air. "Hey, stop, you can't take my car. You're parked on a fire hydrant, buddy," the cop barked back, not even looking up from his ticket pad. "Step back or you'll be cited for interfering." The realization rippled through the crowd of guests. It wasn't just the wedding that was ruined, their cars were being impounded. The elegant, polite facade of the wedding guests instantly evaporated into a primal, desperate stampede. 200 people abandoned the bride, abandoned the aesthetic, and engaged in a frantic shoving foot race to the street, desperately trying to reach their vehicles before the repo hooks attached. Women kicked off their expensive high heels, sprinting across the manicured lawns barefoot. Men in tailored suits were openly weeping as they handed their credit cards to the tow truck drivers, begging for drop fees to release their cars. It was a symphony of destruction. It was absolute, unmitigated carnage. I stood on my balcony, gently swirling the Pinot Noir in my glass, watching the flames of their hubris burn everything they had built to the ground. Down on the patio, the space was entirely abandoned, save for the police, the fire marshals, and the shattered remnants of my family. Chloe was still on her knees, sobbing hysterically into her ruined dress, entirely inconsolable. Braden was standing 10 feet away, staring at her with a look of profound, terrifying realization, as if seeing the true, unhinged depth of her delusion for the very first time. And then Karen looked up. Through the chaos, through the flashing red and blue lights, her eyes locked onto me, standing perfectly still on the second-floor balcony. I raised my wine glass a fraction of an inch in a silent, mocking toast. The terror on Karen's face instantly transmuted into pure homicidal fury. "You," she screamed, her voice tearing through her vocal cords. She pointed a trembling, manic finger up at me. "You did this, you called them. You set USUP." She abandoned her weeping daughter and sprinted for the back door of the house. I knew she couldn't get upstairs. The smart locks were very much active and the stairwell door was bolted shut. But it was time to deliver the final blow. I set my wine glass down on the balcony table. I walked back into my bedroom, opened the fireproof safe, and retrieved the heavy, professional stock paper. I walked out of my room, down the stairs, and unlocked the heavy door leading to the kitchen. Karen burst through the patio doors just as I stepped into the room. She looked like a deranged animal, her hair disheveled, her expensive dress stained with white chemical fire retardant powder. "I am going to kill you," she shrieked, lunging toward me. "I am going to sue you for every penny you have. You ruined her life. You owe us $20,000 for this wedding. I will take your house." I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. I simply raised my hand and held out the printed document. "I didn't ruin anything, Karen," I said, my voice cutting through her hysterics with the cold, clinical edge of a scalpel. "I tried to save you. I begged you to get permits. I begged you to follow the fire codes. You refused. You called me a hater. You told me the rules didn't apply to you. You called the city on us," she sobbed, hitting my chest with her fists. "I protected my property from your negligence," I corrected her, unfolding the document and shoving it directly into her line of sight. "Do you remember signing this? The venue use agreement and total indemnification clause." Karen stopped hitting me. She stared at the paper, her eyes struggling to focus on the bold text. "Let me read section 3 to you," I said softly, stepping into her space, forcing her to listen. "The host, Chloe, and her legal representatives assume 100% of the financial and legal liability for this event. The host agrees to fully indemnify and hold harmless the property owner against any and all municipal citations, fines, property damage, and police actions resulting from this gathering." Karen stopped breathing. The air left her lungs in a hollow, ragged gasp as the true, devastating reality of her signature finally registered. "You see, Karen," I whispered, leaning in close, "code enforcement just handed you a citation. Running an unpermitted commercial venue with massive fire code violations carries a baseline fine of $5,000 in this city. Every single tow truck hookup out on that street is a $300 impound fee that your furious guests are going to demand you pay them back for. And the fire department is going to bill you for the emergency response." I tapped the paper against her chest. "I don't owe you a dime, you owe the city everything. You wanted to play influencer, congratulations. You're officially an event planner, good luck with the invoices." I turned around, walked back to the stairwell, and locked the door behind me, leaving her standing alone in the massive, silent kitchen. The aftermath was swifter and more brutal than I could have ever anticipated. By 6 o'clock that evening, the street was entirely clear of cars, save for a few confused Ubers trying to pick up stranded, furious guests. The fire department forced the rental company to dispatch an emergency crew to tear down the canvas tent that very night, costing Chloe an extra $2,000 emergency breakdown fee. I sat on my balcony until the sun went down, watching the workers dismantle the wooden poles and haul the heavy, stained canvas away. By midnight, my backyard was entirely empty. The grass was a bit trampled and there was white chemical powder dusting the stone patio, but the silence had returned. The profound, beautiful silence of my private sanctuary. I didn't hear from Karen or Chloe for 3 months. The flying monkeys in the family group chat never materialized. Once the extended family realized that Karen and Chloe were responsible for their cars getting towed and impounded, the family completely turned on them. The toxic matriarchy collapsed under the weight of its own financial ruin. Chloe's Instagram live broadcast of the fire marshal raiding her wedding went incredibly viral, but not in the way she had curated. It was ripped, re-uploaded, and mocked endlessly on TikTok under the hashtag #cottagecore catastrophe. She lost half her followers, deleted her account, and according to a quiet text I received from Uncle Dave, Braden postponed the legal marriage indefinitely to focus on his peace. Karen is currently working a second job in retail to help pay off the $8,000 in municipal fines and civil judgments brought against them by angry guests. As for me, I hired a professional landscaping crew to pressure wash the patio and aerate the lawn. I spent the weekend sitting by the koi pond, listening to the wind in the weeping willows, knowing with absolute, unshakable certainty that no one in my family would ever ask to use my backyard again.